listeners, it's your host, Asia. So, happy President's Day. In honor of the holiday, we are bringing you a rerun of not one, but two of our favorite episodes, and they're both about John Adams' opera Nixon in China. Fun facts, did you know that President Nixon was an accordion player and an accomplished pianist? He even did performances at the White House, at the Grand Ole Opry, and he composed and played his own piece, Richard Nixon Piano Concerto No. 1, on a primetime TV show in 1963. All true stories. This discussion that you're about to hear on Classical Classroom is one that I had with Michael Remson of the American Festival for the Arts, and it was so epic because we were trying to cover an entire 2-hour opera that we originally divided it into 2 episodes. But today, we are splicing it into one for your listening pleasure. We hope that you enjoy it. And if you do like it, we hope that you'll go to iTunes and vote for us by subscribing to us and rating and reviewing us. Tell your friends, tell their babies, tell their mothers. Why not? Anyway, so that's enough of me. Enjoy the episode. And God bless America. My name is Daisha Clay. I'm the audio librarian here at Classical 91.7. While I'm a real librarian, I have a deep, dark secret. I know very little about classical music. I grew up listening to rock, and I know something about jazz. But when it comes to classical, the thing is, I want to learn. And as it turns out, I work with people who know a lot about classical music. Every week on this show, one of my coworkers will give me a homework assignment, a piece of classical music they think I should know, and then we'll discuss it. Come learn with me in the Classical Classroom. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Classical Classroom. I'm Daisha Clay, and here with me today is Dr. Michael Remson. He is a composer, author, educator, and administrator. He's the executive and artistic director of the American Festival for the Arts, which provides music education programs for young people. He's also a Moore School alum. Michael, welcome to the program.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, you were rocking that pink shirt, by the way.
Thanks.
It's pretty awesome.
Hey.
So what are we going to be talking about today?
Well, we talked about doing a couple different pieces, but the one we settled in on is a piece that has a lot of history in Houston itself and is more and more being considered one of the big landmark works of the late 20th century, and that's John Adams' opera Nixon in China.
Yeah, I read that it premiered in Houston in 87?
In 1987, and actually it premiered at the Wortham Center, and the Wortham itself was only 5 months old when the opera premiered. It had just opened that previous, I think it was in May that it had opened. And
really?
So Nixon in China was actually one of the first large works to be premiered there.
So why did you choose this piece personally?
Well, the piece for me has a lot of sort of personal resonance as a composer and specifically as an opera composer. To hear it and its very contemporary treatment of opera as a form, and also, that it incorporates a contemporary subject. Mm-hmm. And to me, it seemed such an important vanguard and direction for opera in the late 20th century. And there had been a few before this that are considered very important, kind of like Philip Glass's Einstein on the Beach and some other works in that vein. But this was the one that, for me personally, really said, wow, this is really doable. You can take this language, you can take these kind of subject matters, and you can create a piece that is super compelling.
I have to admit that I have kind of an aversion to most opera and musicals because, I don't know, there's something about people singing a story that just really gets to me. But I listened to some of this, and I gotta say, I was intrigued. It was not only did I enjoy the music, but I don't know if there is a particular style of opera singing without having the language to really talk about it. There's the crazy vibrato opera, mm-hmm. and then there's whatever this is, which is really lovely and melodic. It's
written in what, sort of in the music biz we would call a very declamatory style. It doesn't use a huge amount of, sort of opera-style singing, what we've come to expect, sort of from the big, giant operas, the Wagner and the Verdi and things like that. And it's written so that the language, part of it's, of course, it's in English, which helps you as an English speaker to connect in more to it, rather than being in a foreign language, which is probably the first reason why a lot of people are turned off to opera, because it's like, hey, this isn't a language I don't even know, and there's all these people sort of wailing around on stage. I don't know what I'm supposed to be listening for.
Right.
And so this, because it's written in a very straightforward style, and that the text is clean. They went to a brilliant poet named Alice Goodman who wrote this text very, very cleanly, and then the text is repeated in the minimalist style. It's repeated a lot, and so it's very easy to grasp it, to get it, and to hear to really understand what's happening at any given moment. And I think it makes it a lot more accessible. But let me say, you're not alone in the world of people who are kind of freaked out by people standing on stage singing. It's like, something great is happening to me, and instead of celebrating, I'm just going to burst into song. I mean, that's just not. I mean, it's not real, and it's a convention that does take some getting used to. But some people, I guess, never get used to it. But when you do, it's a whole nother world, and it's so wonderful to watch the different nuances of how people kind of get into the world of opera.
Yeah, I've definitely heard some opera that I thought was just, gorgeous. Like, I want to say it was Madame Butterfly that I heard that I went, oh, wow, that is just breathtaking, But this, I've had a lot of people come on to the classical classroom and talk about, they always mention John Adams. I've yet to have somebody come on and actually specifically talk about
I was the first person foolish enough to pick
John
him.
Adams. So can you tell me a little bit about him as a composer?
About him personally? Well, he was born in 1947, if I'm not mistaken, and so he's just a little bit behind the other composers who get lumped into the term minimalism. He's just a little bit younger than Philip Glass or Steve Reich, who I think both were born in the late 30s. He went to Harvard, and then he went out to California, and so he's very influenced by a big variety of music. And so, he's written a variety of orchestral pieces, and this was his first opera. This was the first time he'd ever been approached about doing an opera, was to write Nixon in China. And the man, it's worth mentioning, the man who was kind of behind the whole thing was a director named Peter Sellers. And and he sort of was known for doing a lot of avant-garde theater and had come up in that world and had gotten very interested in doing opera. And he went to Adams and said, let's write an opera called Nixon in China. And Adams said, no, I don't want to, because Sellers was known for being kind of a bad boy in the theater and the opera world. And remember, Nixon's resignation is only 10 years earlier than this. And so Nixon was still a very polarizing figure in American life, even at that point. People had very strong opinions about him. And certainly any reevaluation that we've done of Nixon over the years was still long off. And so when Adams said no, he thought this is going to, he did it because he thought it was going to be a satire. He thought it would be an unfair treatment of it. But Sellers was able to convince Adams to approach the story in a much more interesting way. And that's how they brought Alice Goodman, the librettist, in as well. And they turned the story into a story about mythology, about contemporary mythology and the myths of who we are and how we create our own myths in a lot of ways, and how then also the media plays an important role in kind of the mythologizing of public figures and private ones, for that matter.
Wow.
And so each of the keys of the 6 characters who are made up, who are central to the story, each one is kind of their own mythology and has created their own mythology on some levels as we meet each of them over the course of the story.
Wow. Well, let's hear some of this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a 2-hour opera or more than 2-hour opera, and of course we don't have time for that in this context. And so I picked 3 excerpts that I thought would really introduce people to the story. And the first one comes in Act 1, and the opera opens with sort of a very dreamy kind of tableau on stage, and you see all the Chinese people sort of standing there, and they sing in this very sort of philosophical style about the world and about what's happening. And basically what it is they're members of the Chinese military, and they're waiting on the tarmac for Nixon's plane to arrive. Now, the other thing you got to remember is that anybody of a certain generation remembers watching this on the news, that this was this was big news when Nixon went to China. Politically, it was a huge deal. China had been, was a communist country. Nixon was known as a very rabid anti-communist, and this visit was the beginning of normalizing any kind of relations between the U.S. and China, and even the U.S. and the USSR, because Russia got sort of a little jealous that China and Nixon were getting together, and so they invited Nixon too, and that's what led to the first round of SALT treaties, which were the strategic arms talks that they had. So politically, this was everywhere on the news, and the images were, it was kind of like when the moon landing, a lot of people really remember these images very strongly. So they were super careful to recreate these images on stage. It's almost like going back and seeing it on television again when you first see it. And in fact, the scene that we see, the first scene we're going to listen to, when the plane arrives, and they literally had this giant sort of plane kind of roll in on stage, and the door opens and there's Nixon doing the peace sign thing, and Pat coming out. And it was so funny because all the characters on stage applaud, and actually everybody in the audience applauded too, because they remembered sort of that moment, and you really get swept up. It's like, oh, well, it's the president, and so you start clapping, do what you think you're supposed to do. And so he comes down and he shakes hands with Zhou Enlai, and he starts to meet this sort of long procession of Chinese officials that are lined up on the tarmac to meet him. And as he sings, the music sort of explodes into this fanfare. And Nixon is shaking all the hands of the people, but he then turns and he's got this explosion inside of him of the excitement of what's happening. And he sings this aria called News Has a Kind of Mystery. And it's all about the mythology of this moment. He's going, oh my God, this is history. It's happening at this exact moment. And we get to sort of the bombastic Americanism compared to the Chinese culture that is happening at the beginning. And we get his unbelievable energy and excitement over what is actually happening. And the music just captures it perfectly.
I read recently that during Mao's reign, Western music had been completely banned in China, and they didn't even start allowing Western classical music to be played there until 1978.
Yeah. The Cultural Revolution was very, Madame Mao and the Cultural Revolution was very, very powerful.
Yeah, so it's particularly poignant, maybe? I don't know, to set this very sort of contemporary Western opera there in a place where that would not have been allowed.
Not have been heard, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So, yeah, let's hear some.
Yeah. As a kind of mystery. So you can hear the repeated text, and how so that you really get it, and this very declamatory style. It's very just straightforward singing. Some people complain about that in the opera, that there's too much of that, but for the style of the music, I think it goes perfectly.
Why do minimalists do that?
Why do they use repetition? What is the... Well, the point of minimalism is to get a lot out of a little, out of a small sort of cell of music. And it does repeat, but there's an evolution that happens very, very slowly in that repetition. It's based a lot on sort of Hindi concepts of time and evolution of thinking, and so something will be repeating, and then maybe 10 or 15 seconds later you realize, wait, this has changed ever so subtly. And that slowness of that evolution is really what minimalism is about. Is about taking you on a journey, but appreciating all the small moments that you go on with.
Okay, that helps. Thanks.
And so you hear Zhou Enlai in the background saying, I want to introduce you to, because there's just this procession of people going by.
So we're hearing sort of Nixon's inner dialogue, and then also what's going on outside.
Exactly. And it's that inner dialogue that is captured so beautifully in the music, the excitement, the tension, if you will. History
as we made history. The eyes and ears of history as we made history. On our flight over from Shanghai, the countryside looked drab and gray. Bruegel, Pat said.
Such a peculiar reference right there. The text references the Flemish Renaissance painter Bruegel.
Really?
And he's talking about the flat, the sort of the pale colors and the flatness of the countryside. And he says, Bruegel, Pat says. And it's like as if Pat leaned over to him and said, oh, it reminds me of this Flemish painter. And it's such a weird throwaway line, but it's so interesting at the same time.
Yeah.
It sets us up for Pat in a very small way when we meet her at the beginning of Act 2.
We live in an unsettled time. We live in an unsettled time.
The lushness of the harmonies and his use of the harmonies is very interesting. When he goes from one chord to another, especially in this aria more than in some of the others, it almost always has one note in common between one chord and the other. But like for a theory teacher, it would be maddening because there's no real relationship between the two chords other than the fact that they have this note in common. But it allows him to move in very, very fluid ways. So the music keeps moving along very, very nicely, but he can use these denser, more romantic sounding harmonies.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you have the orchestration, which is huge in this piece. I mean, Adams took the standard orchestra and added saxophones and synthesizers and pianos and a much larger percussion section. And it's so that he can get lots of different kinds of sounds out of the orchestra. And the color in here is remarkable.
The earth sea.
He sings, news has a kind of mystery. And essentially what that is it's a very traditional operatic structure for an aria where you have an idea, and then a contrasting section, and then you return to that idea. And in the Baroque days, that would have been called a da capo aria, but it's not a specifically one here. But it is a very sort of traditional structure for an aria, and I think that's really important in understanding what's happening because, again, Sellers encouraged Adams to use a lot of the traditional operatic structures, and so what it allowed him to do was to be very adventurous with text setting and how the words are set to the music and the colors in the orchestra and the rhythms. But if he's doing something very traditional in terms of this overall structure of the aria, it's something everybody can kind of hold on to. Everybody goes, oh, I know where I am. I know where I am in this piece. I heard that before. And it breeds a certain kind of familiarity that as a listener is very comforting.
So using this traditional structure with very non-traditional sounds and sights and okay.
It's the hallmark of what many would call neoclassicism, and it was a movement in music at the early part of the 20th century where composers were experimenting with harmony and with rhythm, and they were really pushing the envelope in a variety of ways. And so by using a little bit of the traditional with a little bit of the modern, that mixture, theoretically, that composers felt that it would make it more accessible for audiences and allow them to push the envelope in certain areas. Because if you push every envelope, you have
once.
musical chaos and nobody knows what to do anymore.
Right.
So,
But having a little bit of the known with the unknown makes the pill a little bit easier to swallow.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And so the neoclassicists and the neo-romantics were very much wedded to this notion.
So with I always kind of tend to understand things in literary terms. So say you've got poetry with a rhyme scheme and whatever that scheme may be
versus free verse, let's say.
Right. So we're talking Shakespeare versus Charles Bukowski sort of thing. Like and so Mahler was the Charles Bukowski, Allen Ginsberg, and then neoclassicism sort of pulled it back in and said, no, wait,
let's
form
go back
can
and
be a useful tool.
Yeah, yes, exactly.
Okay.
It's one of many useful tools that are at a composer's disposal, and any composer who was at the vanguard of something new that happened in music was pushing the envelope somewhere.
Yeah.
And it was in the late Romantic period where form was one of the things that was, a lot of things were getting pushed in that late Romantic and early 20th century period. Composers were trying lots and lots of different things. But yeah, we've oversimplified the metaphor, but yeah, that's essentially correct.
Like the next thing you know, ladies are going to be wearing pants and things are just getting
God
crazy.
Forbid.
Yeah.
I know, showing their ankles and
Right.
Exactly.
Okay, let's get back to the music.
Yeah.
I know America is good at heart. An old cold warrior piloting towards an unknown shore through shoals. The rats begin to chew the sheets. The rats begin
And
to
then here, a total change of character.
The rats begin to chew
And this is his,
the rats begin
you can hear the lines, the rats begin to chew the sheets, and it's this suspicion, it's the suspicious side of Nixon who has to be on guard. This is it's not just all fun and games going over and making history and meeting, the Chinese people and doing all of this. There's something also, an undercurrent that he has to be very careful about.
Sure, because he's going into a communist country, which, as you said, he was particularly averse to communism.
Well, and the fate of how people are going to live together on this planet hangs in the balance on some levels. Not to get too prosaic about it.
Well, yeah, but that's
But
basically
the relationship
his
between the East and the
confronting.
West was at a crucial point.
the spinning globe from the flamethrowers of the mob. We must press on.
How was Nixon received in China? Were they happy for him to be there?
Oh, I think so. I don't know exactly. But I think it represented a major step forward in Chinese and American relations.
Okay.
And this was the groundwork. Even still, one would argue today that Chinese and American relations aren't ideal.
Sure.
But this laid the groundwork for there to even be a dialogue.
Yeah.
And I think for all of them, they all knew the gravity of what was happening.
All right, so that was the end of the original episode 1. We're about to get to episode 2 of this discussion. But before that, here's your musical interlude. Okay, on to episode 2. Last time on Classical Classroom, Dr. Michael Remson taught us about the composer John Adams, not the dude who signed the Declaration of Independence, and his minimalist opera, Nixon in China, which is all about an actual trip President Nixon took to the actual country of China. Meanwhile, in the opera, Nixon was having a pensive moment. Suddenly aware was he of his visit to China's place in the history books. But then his suspicious side came out, and he sang about rats chewing sheets. And now for part 2 of our conversation with Dr. Michael Remson and Act 2 of Nixon in China. So, back to the music. What are we going to hear next?
I thought we would go to the beginning of Act 2. One of the things that the piece is particularly effective in is showing us the two women characters who were central to what was happening, and they are the focus of Act 2 of the opera. And Act 1 and Act 3 are very much about the political side of what was happening, the sort of the surface, the visual images that were seared into our collective consciousness. Mm-hmm. And Act 2 is really about the two women who were at the center of what was happening. And the first of those two women was Pat Nixon. Pat Nixon is a fascinating figure in contemporary history. She saw herself as a very simple person, and that she'd come from very humble backgrounds. She was a farm girl. And here she was. She married, a nice boy who was a local politician who became president. And, regardless of how we felt about her, she saw herself as very unprepared for what was happening. And of course, this whole trip to China, this was unbelievable, nobody had ever really done anything like this before, and certainly not in such a public way. Mm-hmm. And like every first lady, she had a super important job to do, and that was to be the human face of what was happening, over there. And so the images that are, again, if you're a certain age, there was this red coat that she wore that was knee length with these little knee boots that she had. It seemed like she went everywhere in those when she was in China, and that's what she wears throughout the entire opera. And you see her, and this opening of Act 2 is when she goes on a tour. She's taken by Chairman Mao's secretaries on a tour to see the real people of China, if you will. It's probably the most touching section of the opera, where she goes from sort of place to place and meets people and sees people. And there's a very touching exchange that we'll hear in this section. It's not an aria, really. It's just a scene.
Can you tell me, I mean, I understand a little bit what an aria is.
Yeah.
And
that's
it's
an easy
sort
question.
of-
Yeah. An aria, I mean, really in the most traditional sense, an aria it's a solo, generally speaking. And it is a time when the action of the opera kind of slows down or stops, and where the character can reflect emotionally. Usually it's a place where there's more emotional expression.
I see.
On the part of the character. And even here, we have the scene where Pat is being taken around and sees all these things, and a lot of action is happening. And then at the end of this scene, she pauses and she reflects on everything. She sings, and she wishes. The aria is called "This Is Prophetic," which is halfway through Act 2, and she reflects on everything she's seen and expresses her wish for peace in the world. And it's a very personal moment. It's a very personal expression, and that's the difference between sort of the aria and the scene. You'll see in this section we're going to hear, there's just a lot of things happening.
Yeah.
I mean, she goes to a factory that makes little ivory elephants, and she remarks, "Oh, well, this is the symbol of our party." And you can see her being the very, the politician's wife. But then as we go further, she goes to a school and she sings to a child, that she remembers when she was a teacher. And she said, "This is so wonderful because now, I was a teacher, but now I get to learn from you, from the children of China." And this very sort of personal moment that we see. So it's all these things that happen, and then the aria becomes the summation, if you will, of those experiences in emotion.
Is an aria always a monologue?
No, not always,
Okay.
but generally, in the most traditional sense.
Yeah.
I'm always reluctant to speak in absolute terms,
Yeah.
because
Well,
somebody,
that's true
somebody out
for
there will go,
anything in
"That's not
music."
true. There's this,
Yeah.
So it's generally speaking, yeah.
Okay.
It's more often than not, it's a monologue.
Okay, let's hear it.
Let's hear the opening of Act 2. Yeah, this is just the very beginning. And so here at the beginning, we have that same nervous energy in the music that we had in News, but very different colors in the orchestra. The woodwinds, are there, and even these little sounds of the flutes and the oboes sort of piercing the texture. To me, this reminds me of birds singing almost, and it sets a very soft beginning for the second act here, as opposed to this sort of very aggressive, Nixon aria. It's just a much softer color that we're surrounding, and we see Pat. She's lying on a bed. She's wearing the red coat and the boots, and she sits up, and you can tell the stress of this is really weighing on her. And she gets up, and she takes an aspirin, and she tries to move around, and then she's like, "Nah, I'm going to lie back down." And so she lies back down for a while, and then the secretaries arrive and start taking her around on the tour.
Okay.
This wonderful section where when she sings the word triviality or trivial, it's just a second, and it gives it this sort of harmonic flavor. But then when she sings "Good Lord," it's this huge leap of an octave or a tenth that is her emphatic, good Lord. I'm very emphatic about it. It's a beautiful setting. It's really one of the most melodically enchanting sections of the opera. And you can tell that, at least I like to think, that Adams felt very, very warmly about Pat's character and gave her these really lovely melodies to sing.
Is the librettist the person who wrote the words
Alice
trying
Goodman,
to is she trying to sort of just introduce this character of Pat?
Very human. Yeah,
Like,
very, very
okay.
human here, where, she sings, I treat each day like Christmas, and trivial things are not for me.
Okay. I like that. Treat every day like Christmas.
And now Chairman Mao's secretaries have come to take her on her tour, and will take her around, and they say, look at the earth, look at the simple things that are out there, and it's how they connect initially, is around the simplicity, each in their own way.
Mm-hmm. Are they sort of acting like a chorus?
Very much so.
Okay.
I mean, the casting, it's really actually quite brilliant of Chairman Mao's secretaries. It was 3 women who sang in unison the whole time. So they were like this little Greek chorus running around stage the whole time.
Neat.
And again, this softness of the orchestral texture.
This little elephant in glass brings back so many memories. The symbol of our party, prize of our success. Our sacred cow, surrounded by blind Brahmins. Slow, muscle-bound, well-dressed, half awake, with liberty upon her back. Tell me, is it one of a kind? Is
So
it
she's
one
holding
of
the
a
statue of the elephant, and she thinks it's one of a kind, and the secretaries are like, no, this is mass produced in our factories, and the elephant for the Chinese is a symbol of the abilities of the communists to do all of this, and to churn out thousands of these in factories every day, where she's seeing it as this metaphor for the party, for the Republican Party and its successes. So very interesting, this small object becoming 2 very different ways of looking at the object, and it represents the sort of 2 very distinct viewpoints of the characters on stage. And all of this, you have to remember, was on the news. I mean, that they go to a clinic, and she sees someone get a shot, and she's like, "Oh, ouch!" But all of this was on the news. You saw
they're following
the visuals,
her around
and
with cameras.
literally, we're
Okay.
literally following history around in the context of the opera. And so now they go to a farm, and everybody's yelling because they say, "Oh, come see the pig! It's a prize-winning pig!" And you'll hear the chorus here, and they sing "Pig, pig, 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 pig," and it's a hilarious text setting here. There's a wonderful sense of humor here. And these wonderful brass surges underneath. And hear the complexity of the rhythms, so much more interesting than sort of the cliche of what minimalism is. This rhythm's very jarring and interesting and fun,
Here are some children having fun.
and then here she meets the children.
It's so explicit. We are some children having fun.
Yes, I know. It's just sort of, again, that directness, and what gets lost in the translation is like, yes, here are some children having fun.
Frolic.
I used to be a teacher many years ago, and now I'm here to learn from you.
And now here's the music from the opening again. Adam's very cleverly bringing it back around to the beginning, to the music we heard at the beginning of the scene, and again, sort of helping us connect our way through, a fairly long act here, so that we have sort of guideposts, if you will,
like an
to
anchor
to take us through in a lot of ways. Yeah. The scene melts away, and Pat is left alone on stage, and she sings her great aria. This is prophetic about everything she's just witnessed and what this means to her, and again, the wish for a peaceful future. And she'll move into it right here.
So you said the second act mainly focuses on these two women. So it's Pat Nixon.
In the beginning.
Nixon's wife.
Yeah.
And then also Mao's.
And then on Madame Mao is for the complete opposite, for the second half of the act. And what happens is after this scene, we go to I think it's at the Imperial Palace, and the Nixons have been invited to see a ballet. And they actually recreated a real ballet. For the piece, it was a ballet called The Red Detachment of Women. And it was written by Madame Mao. And it told the story, sort of true to the heart of communism, where you had a sadistic, brutal landlord who represents money, who is ultimately beaten by a group of women farmers and laborers, and how these women rise up and they are able to prevail over the brutal landlord. And so, of course, it's promoting the values of communism. And so the Nixons are invited to this performance, and this part of it actually happened where they were invited to the performance, but then they, in the performance of the opera, they take some real liberties here. And first off, the brutal landlord is portrayed by the Henry Kissinger character. He sort of folds into the action, and there's a scene where he is whipping the heroine, the girl who's the heroine of the piece, and he's whipping her. And Pat gets so caught up in the moment of what's happening that she rushes on stage to protect the girl, and she becomes essentially part of the action.
Whoa.
And Madame Mao is furious that this has happened. And so she sings this huge aria. I mean, now this is an aria. And it is a bravura piece that is extraordinarily difficult, called I Am the Wife of Madame Mao. And in the aria, she reasserts her position as the leader of the Cultural Revolution, and that nobody is, sort of more important than she is at this particular moment. And she reasserts her place in what is happening at this moment in history. And this is a crazy aria. It is very, very difficult to sing. Some people have compared it to the famous Queen of the Night aria from Mozart's The Magic Flute, which is also notoriously difficult to sing.
When you say bravura,
what does that
mean?
It is the it's the character,
like bombastic
of the aria itself, where she is bigger than life, and she is proclaiming herself. She is standing up and assuming her place in the picture of what's happening here. And so it is, but yes, this sense of bombasticness. What is the adjective for that? Bombasticity.
Yeah.
But she's furious, but she is also, she's going to make sure that everybody knows who she is and what her place in this moment is. And so it is a wonderful, wonderful aria, and let's listen.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you get this rhythm, this magisterial rhythm, ba-dum-bum, ba-dum-bum, ba-dum-bum.
I am the wife of a mountain top. I am the wife of a mountain top, who is the makeup of a star. When I appear the people when I appear the
I love the use of the text there, because she sings, when I appear, the people hang. And then she sings, when I appear, the people hang on my every word. And so it gives you two very different meanings of what's happening there. And you hear the brass are just, just pounding the rhythms away in this aria, and so it gives it this huge sort of furious character that underscores this whole thing. And then here she's just soaring up.
Is all opera so literal, or is this an Alice Goodman thing? I mean, like, there are all of these points where I'm noticing that she's saying, "I am the wife of Mao Zedong," and the children earlier were singing, "We are children playing."
Yeah,
it's very.
It is. No, it's not.
Okay.
Yeah, but there certainly are lots of examples in opera, especially early opera, where characters kind of come out and say who they are. But this is a very different kind of scene. Okay. I mean, she's reasserting her position here. It's not just like she's not introducing herself.
She's saying, I'm the wife of Mao Zedong.
Who's got two thumbs?
You need to pay attention.
That's right. Who's got two thumbs and is the wife of Madame Mao? That would be this guy. That's what's happening here. It's not like she's introducing herself to the characters.
She's like, recognize.
Yes. You will respect my authority.
Okay.
Yeah. And of course, all of this as she sings, that everything that she follows the book, which is of course the book of Mao Zedong's sayings.
The little red cookbook.
This, exactly. Yeah. And so that everything she does is by the book, which reflects her philosophy and also her importance. And then she sings this middle part here. She's singing, so let me be a grain of sand, which is very sort of philosophically tied into this kind of the concept of communism, that you're just one of many, even if you're important, but you're still one of many. But then she'll jump back up and then we'll come back. And again, the structure of this aria is very much the same as in News. We have an opening, a middle section here with the chorus joining in, and then we'll return to the I am the wife of Madame Mao at the end here.
What are they shouting?
Joy.
Oh, okay.
And here we are at the beginning again. Just these huge high notes, and the texture of this almost sounds like an organ at times. It just, that sort of bombastic sound just behind her. It's like all the force of the orchestra is just right there, and which only adds to the difficulty for the singer.
I love those I don't know if it's trombones or what, but the sort of blowout sound.
I know.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
So
the
cool.
low brass section gets a workout in this opera.
Get it, girl.
And huge percussion bass drums.
The music in this part is so different than everything else.
Well, because there's no place else in this opera where the emotions are so on the surface.
Okay.
Really, I mean, this is, you will pay attention to me. You will respect me.
Yeah.
And it's all just right on the surface. And so I think Adams very wisely brings the brass and the percussion in here you're going to feel this in your bones. If you're sitting in the audience, this is going to go right through you.
The seats are shaking. Yeah. There are just there's so much to take in with opera. There are
every single one. Yep.
So many moving parts. I mean,
it is unbelievable everything that's going on.
The prep work, I'm sure.
When you really, it's kind of almost fun to go to an opera once and absorb the story and the music, and then go back and when you're a little familiar with the piece and just think about oh my God, what are all the mechanics that are making this happen. You know, all the stage-hands, the chorus, the orchestra, the lighting guys, the costume people who are running around, the sets. I mean, it is a small army of people who pull off magic virtually every day. I know. You're ready for the bar after that.
Wow.
Yeah. One fun fact too is, you know, if it is a great opera, and it's really, for the pieces in the last quarter of the 20th century, I mean, it's probably the one that's going to have the most legs. And I don't dare to prognosticate on some levels, but, you know, 100 years from now, this opera will be in the history books. I'm sure of it. And it's an important work, and it's had a variety of performances. You know, it's had many performances since the premiere here in Houston. But a fun thing that actually they just announced recently is that Houston is going to restage the work for its 20th anniversary. So
Neat.
if you can hold on till 2017, I think it's the 16-17 season where they're going to do it again.
I'd actually like to see that.
Oh, I will definitely.
I mean, this sounds really interesting.
I will definitely have my tickets. That's no question about it. I'll go at least once, and probably a couple times, because it's just a great opportunity to see this work.
Yeah, you've me saying that I'm like, yes, I would love to go see that opera means that you have worked magic, Michael
Houston
Remson.
Grand Opera, you need to call the station right now and sell this lady a subscription.
Yes, please. Well, Michael Remson, thank you so much for coming onto the program today.
It's been totally my pleasure. I've had a gas.
Yeah, it's been awesome. Everybody, thanks for listening. If you have something that you would like to hear on the program, please send me an email at dclay@classical917.org. And if you need to find out about past or present episodes or any other information that's possibly relevant to the show, go to classical917.org/classroom. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.